My name is Tyler Warren. I'm 32 years old, live in Portland, and own a small but growing carpentry business. People who know me now say I'm calm, dependable, the guy who shows up when he says he will. But if you had known me 15 years ago, you'd never believe that was the same person. I was a teenager with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes and a pair of scuffed sneakers, standing in the rain outside a house that no longer felt like mine. My father had just thrown me out. No warning. No conversation. Just a door slammed in my face, and a voice I'll never forget. "You're no son of mine." I stood there, numb, as the porch light flicked off behind me. That light, warm and yellow, had been a beacon growing up. I remember watching it from the yard when I was little, waiting for my dad to come home from work. But that night, it felt like the door to my entire past had been locked shut. Back then, I didn't understand why. Not really. I knew I'd uncovered some secret I was never meant to see. But I had no idea the cost would be losing my entire family. I've spent the last 15 years rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I thought I was done with the past. Done with them. Until, out of nowhere, they showed up on my doorstep. It was a Thursday morning. Gray skies, just like that night so many years ago. I was heading out to install cabinets for a client when I opened the door, and there they were. My father, Ronald. My stepsister, Angela. And a boy I didn't recognize, but who looked uncannily familiar. I froze. My hand still on the doorknob, heart hammering in my chest. "Tyler," my father said. We need your help." And just like that, everything I buried came rushing back. But maybe I should start at the beginning. I was born in San Jose, California, in 1993. My mom, Karen, was a schoolteacher's oft-spoken, warm, the kind of mom who packed handwritten notes in your lunchbox even in middle school. My dad, Ronald, ran a small auto repair shop. He was stern but fair. A provider. He came from old-school valuesmen, don't cry, family means everything, and you solve problems by manning up. For the first 10 years of my life, I thought we were the perfect family. Then Mom got sick. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer the summer before I turned 11. I remember the hospital smell, the way her hands felt smaller in mine. She fought hard, but within a year, she was gone. After that, everything changed. Dad stopped smiling. He buried himself in work, and when he wasn't working, he was drinking. Not violently, but steadily, beer after beer in silence, the television always on but never watched. I tried to stay out of the way. Tried to be good. I thought if I didn't cause trouble, he might see me again. 2 years later, he married Denise. She was nothing like my mother. Denise was sharp, controlled, the kind of woman who ironed napkins and corrected your grammar mid-sentence. She had a daughter, Angela, who was my age. Blonde, polite, always dressed like she was auditioning for a school brochure. Everyone loved Angela. Teachers, neighbors. My father. Especially my father. From the start, I felt like an outsider in my own home. Angela got the big room. I got the boxy one next to the garage. She got piano lessons, dance recitals, attention. I got silence, or worse, criticism. If I brought home a B+, my dad asked why it wasn't an A. If Angela got a B, he took her out for ice cream. I told myself it was just adjustment. That things would balance out, that if I just worked hard enough, I could win his approval back. But that never happened. By the time I was 16, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory. I'd eat dinner in silence while Angela talked about student council and Denise nodded along, like they were the real family and I was some distant relative. I started spending more time at the local library, more time working shifts at the grocery store, just to stay away. But I didn't complain. I didn't lash out. I kept everything bottled inside, because deep down, I still believed that if I just held on a little longer, I could earn my place back in his heart. And then I found the letter. It was tucked away in an old file cabinet in the garage. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a wrench, for God's sake. But that letter, it changed everything. And it got me kicked out of the only home I'd ever known. I'll tell you what was in it. I'll tell you everything. But you have to understand, this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about survival. About identity. About what happens when the truth finally knocks on your door, 15 years after you were thrown away for uncovering it. So, stay with me. I promise it's a ride. It was the first Saturday of March. The air was still cold, but spring was starting to show its green buds peeking through the hedges, birds calling out like they'd survived something. I had the house to myself that morning. Angela was at a debate tournament, Denise was volunteering at the church, and Dad had gone to the shop early to catch up on paperwork. I had a rare moment of quiet, and honestly, I needed it. School had been overwhelming, work was tiring, and at home, I always felt like I was trying too hard and still failing. So when I wandered into the garage, I wasn't looking for trouble, I just wanted to fix my bike chain and clear my head. But fate doesn't care about your intentions. Fate comes whether you're ready or not. I knelt down by the tool cabinet, this old, beat-up metal thing Dad had owned for as long as I could remember, and pulled open the drawers one by one, looking for a wrench. The drawer stuck halfway out, and I tugged a little harder. That's when it happened. A manila envelope, tucked behind the screwdrivers and socket wrenches, fell to the floor. My name wasn't on it, but it had been opened. Curiosity pulled me in before caution could stop me. Inside was a letter. A single-page letter on stiff white paper. At first glance, I thought it might be a receipt or a document from the auto shop. But then I saw the letterhead, St. Mary's Medical Center. And underneath that, in black ink, maternity record, confidential. My heart started pounding. I told myself to stop, to put it back. But my hands had already unfolded the page. And there it was. My name. Tyler James Warren. Date of birth, the 11th of January, 1993. And then, under the section labeled Parentage Information, I saw something that made my stomach turn to ice. Father, unknown. I blinked. Read it again. Looked for some explanation. But that one word, unknown, was bold and final. Like a slap across the face. No mention of Ronald Warren. No signature. No paternity confirmation. Just a cold, clinical note that said I didn't belong where I thought I did. I don't know how long I stood there staring. Everything around me felt like it blurred out: the tools, the smell of oil and rust, even the light seeping through the garage window. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing getting heavier, sharper, like I was about to fall into some bottomless place I didn't know how to climb out of. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house and wondering if the walls had always been lying to me. Was I a mistake? A secret? Was I someone else's child, taken in out of pity? I looked at Dad differently after that. Every grunt, every stern look, every distant silence, I replayed it all and started to believe what I had tried so hard not to see. He never saw me as his. I tried to keep it in, I really did. But 3 days later, I couldn't take it anymore. He was sitting in the living room, beer in hand, feet up like it was any other night. I walked in slowly, the letter tucked into my hoodie pocket, my heart trying to escape through my chest. "Dad," I said, and even that word felt foreign in my mouth. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't look up. "What's up?" I stepped closer. I found something. In the garage. A letter. From the hospital. That got his attention. He sat up slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly. "What kind of letter?" "A maternity record. About me." Silence, thick enough to choke on. "I don't understand," I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. It says you're not listed as my father." His face changed in an instant. He stood up, taller than I remembered, his voice sharp and full of something I'd never heard before, fear mixed with rage. "You went through my things?" "I was just looking for a wrench." "You had no right to touch that." "I wasn't snooping, I swear. I saw my name. I thought I had a right to know." You don't, he snapped. You don't have a right to anything. My breath caught. So, it's true? He didn't answer. Just stared at me like I was something foul stuck to his shoe. That's why you treat me like I'm nothing? I whispered. Because I'm not yours? That did it. I told your mother this would come back to haunt us, he said, his voice trembling. I told her you should never have known. And just like that, the world stopped. My knees felt weak. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Get out, he said, his voice low and final. What? I said get out. Now. Take your things and go. You can't be serious. You should never have been here in the first place. I'll never forget that sentence. Or the way he turned his back on me, walked into the kitchen like I was a noise he wanted to silence. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just walked upstairs, packed a few things in a plastic bag, and left. No hugs, no explanations, no one stopped me. And that's how I lost everything I thought I knew. After he threw me out, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anywhere to go. I walked through the neighborhood with my hoodie pulled tight around my face, every step heavier than the last, my heart still trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no storm that night, no cinematic thunderclap to match the drama, but, I swear, the air felt like it was holding its breath. Like even the sky couldn't believe he meant it. I ended up sleeping behind the library that night, curled up beside a recycling bin, using my backpack as a pillow and my jacket as a blanket. The concrete was cold and unforgiving, and the silence it was unbearable. Not just because it was quiet, but because it sounded like abandonment. I kept thinking he would come. That I'd wake up to headlights, to the creak of his truck pulling in beside me, to his gruff voice telling me to get in. That he'd been angry, that it was all a mistake. But no one came. The next morning, I went to school like nothing happened. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, brushed my teeth with my finger and a borrowed bit of toothpaste from my locker buddy, and walked into homeroom with a smile that hurt to wear. I didn't tell anyone. Not then. I couldn't. How do you explain something like that? How do you say, my father found out I wasn't his biological son, so he threw me out like trash, and not fall apart? I lived like that for weeks, sleeping on benches, sneaking into the gym locker room to shower before classes, eating whatever I could from vending machines or the leftovers my coworkers at the grocery store didn't want. Every time I walked past my old house, I expected to see Angela looking out from her bedroom window or Denise pulling into the driveway with her perfectly timed errands. But no one ever looked for me. No one asked where I'd gone. Not one phone call. Not one message. It was like I'd never existed at all. That's what hurt the most, not the cold nights or the hunger or the aching muscles from sleeping in awkward positions. It was the silence. The absence. The way I was so easily forgotten by the people who were supposed to fight for me. I thought maybe Angela would reach out. We'd never been close, but we'd lived under the same roof for 5 years. Surely she'd notice I was gone. But days turned into weeks, and there was nothing. Eventually, I scraped together enough to rent a room in a shared house on the other side of town. It was small, barely big enough to fit the twin mattress I found on Craigslist, but it had a door that locked and a window that let in morning light. I started working extra hours, taking every shift I could get. School became an afterthought. My grades slipped, but I didn't care. What was the point? No one was going to ask about my report card. No one was going to ground me or congratulate me or remind me of my potential. I was on my own. I remember sitting on the floor one night, my back against the wall, staring at my phone. I had Dad's number still saved, just Dad. Plain and simple, with no photo, just a default gray circle. My finger hovered over the screen, heart racing. I didn't want to beg, but I wanted answers. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask how he could turn his back on me like that. But in the end, I didn't call. Because deep down, I already knew what he'd say. He didn't see me as his son. It wasn't just the letter, it was everything. The way he'd stopped hugging me after Mom died. The way he'd laughed louder at Angela's jokes, asked her how her day was but never bothered to ask me. The way Denise always looked at me like I was interrupting something. Maybe they never wanted me there in the first place. Maybe I was just a leftover reminder of a woman they'd both moved on from. The more I thought about it, the more it poisoned me. I started questioning everything, every holiday, every smile, every photo on the fridge. Was any of it real? Or had I been living a lie the whole time? And yet, no matter how angry I got, a part of me still missed them. That was the cruelest part. I missed Sunday dinners. I missed falling asleep to the hum of the dishwasher and the sound of Denise laughing at some reality show. I missed the way Angela used to hum when she brushed her hair, the faint scent of Dad's aftershave lingering in the hallway. You don't stop loving people just because they stop loving you. That's what they never tell you. You carry them with you. In your walk. In the way you apologize too much. In the way you flinch when someone raises their voice. I was alone, and I felt it in every cell of my body. It's strange how silence can become a language of cruelty. My father never sent me away with fists or fire, just that look, that indifference, that utter refusal to acknowledge I was ever part of his life. And as the days turned into months, and then into a year, it wasn't just the loss of a roof or a family name that tore at me, it was the slow, grinding realization that I had been erased from everything that mattered. I tried to move on, I really did. I told myself I didn't need them, that I could build my own life, that I'd make something of myself so undeniable they'd regret every moment they looked away. But the truth was, I was just surviving, not thriving. And every now and then, I'd hear from a mutual friend, or see something on social media, or catch a glimpse of them across town at a gas station, and it was like getting punched in the chest all over again. Angela got a new car on her 18th birthday, a shiny white sedan with a red bow and a caption that read, "Thanks Dad and Denise Sadia." And I remember staring at that post, sitting on the edge of my mattress in a room that smelled like paint thinner and secondhand smoke, my fingers trembling as I tried not to throw my phone across the wall. I wasn't bitter because she got a car, I was bitter because it was the same year I had to sell my guitar to pay rent, because I didn't have a single person to lean on when my job cut my hours, because no one even remembered my birthday. The real injustice wasn't in what they gave her. It was in what they took from me. One afternoon, I decided to go back to the house. Not to talk, not to beg us to see. I stood across the street for a while, half hoping someone would look out and recognize me. I saw the new mailbox, the trimmed hedges, the little welcome mat I didn't recognize. The only thing that looked the same was the old oak tree out front, the one Mom used to hang wind chimes on. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The porch. The photos. They'd put up new family portraits shown with Angela in a cap and gown, smiling wide beside Dad and Denise, and another where all three of them were holding a baby boy I didn't even know existed. A son. Their son. And in all those frames, in all those frozen moments of supposed joy, there was no trace of me. Not one. I didn't exist anymore, not in memory, not in legacy, not even in the cluttered background of their happy life. I was airbrushed out, edited away like a typo in a perfect paragraph. A few weeks later, I ran into Mr. Harris, my old high school math teacher, at the hardware store where I picked up a part-time job. He was kind, always had been. He looked at me with surprise, then confusion, then that forced smile people wear when they don't know if they should ask. "Tyler? I haven't seen you in ages. How are your folks?" I froze for a second too long, then gave him the smile I kept for strangers and lies. "We don't really talk anymore." "Oh," he said, eyebrows lifting, sympathy already forming. That's tough. I thought you and your dad were tight, always talked about you like he was proud." Never prom. I didn't have the energy to explain. How do you explain to someone that the man who once taught you how to ride a bike now pretends you don't exist? That being born was apparently your greatest offense? But it didn't end there. When I turned 19, I tried to apply for financial aid to take night classes at the community college. They needed tax documents, parental information I didn't have. I sent a text to Angela. "Hey, I know this is weird, but I need some info about Dad for FAFSA. Can you help me out? She read it. I watched the little seen icon appear. And then, nothing. I followed up a week later. Just checking in. It's kind of urgent. Still no reply. I didn't want money. I didn't want apologies. I just wanted a number. A form. Some acknowledgement that I wasn't asking for the world, just a foothold. But they made it clear. I wasn't family, I wasn't even a favor. I later found out they'd told people I left by choice, that I'd gone off the rails, that I'd become rebellious, difficult, ungrateful, that I had issues. They painted me as some troubled teen who couldn't handle rules, who stormed off into the night. The truth? They buried it. Because owning it meant facing what they did, and denial was easier than guilt. Eventually, I stopped trying. I learned to carry the weight in silence. I learned to stop expecting kindness from people who'd once called me son. And slowly, I started building a life that was mine, piece by painful piece. But no matter how far I got, a part of me never stopped asking, what had I done to deserve being erased? I turned 20 that spring, and it was supposed to feel different, like a new decade, a fresh chapter, a reset, but there I stood, still carrying the same weight, the same ache that had haunted me since that night in the garage. And yet something inside me shifted, a fierce stubbornness ignited by every door that had slammed shut in my face, every "you're not family" that echoed in my bones, every empty birthday that no one celebrated. It wasn't hope, yet not really. It was something harder, more necessary: resolve. I spent that summer working 12-hour shifts at the hardware store, loading shelves, sweeping aisles, helping customers find the right screw or washer or tool. I wasn't just earning money. I was proving something to them, but more to myself. That I could show up, that I could work hard, that I wasn't afraid of the grind. I still lived in that tiny rented room, but I painted the walls every weekend, bought curtains, installed a secondhand bookshelf where I kept my self-help books, old drawings of my mother, and every receipt from tools I'd bought for my future business. In those stacks of invoices and torn cardboard boxes, I saw lines of possibility. Late nights after work, I took community college classes: business management, accounting, basic design. I excelled, partly from desperation, partly from fear that I'd slip backward, that life would pass me by, and that I'd disappear altogether. I tutored other students in math and writing in exchange for help with night classes, and began piecing together what I thought initially of as a simple dream. A carpentry shop where I could craft things with my hands and make something lasting. Something real. Something no one could take away. I remember one evening, around 9 p.m., sitting cross-legged on the floor of my room, surrounded by notepads full of sketches, cabinets, wooden frames, shelves, and I wrote in my journal, "I will prove to the world I am more than a name on a birth certificate. I will build things people trust. I will build the life I should have had. And one day, maybe even Dad will look at me and wonder who I am." It was the closest thing I had to a promise. And I meant it. I applied for a small business grant through a local nonprofit that supported tradespeople. They wanted a proposal, a budget, a business plan. I spent nights researching edges, joints, affordable materials, all the little details. I sketched my shop floor, planned my costs down to the nails. When I received the call inviting me to pitch, I felt a rush I'd never known, not fear, not anxiety, pride. I told them about how I'd been thrown out, how I'd built my life from nothing, how every customer review that said, "excellent workmanship, fair price, reliable," meant everything to me. The committee listened. I could tell they didn't just hear me, they felt me. A month later, I heard I'd been awarded the funds I requested. I cried harder than I had at any funeral in my life. But that achievement, as massive as it felt, didn't fill the emptiness completely. In fact, in some moments, it amplified it. Because every success reminded me that I wasn't sharing it with the people I thought I'd built it for: my father, my old home, the little boy who believed in himself before life knocked him flat. I still felt a flicker of hurt when someone asked, "Is your family backing you?" And I had to laugh and say, "Nope." And the silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was weighted. A reminder that I'd climbed out alone. I started taking freelance carpentry jobs, installing shelves, building mantels, crafting window frames. I built a modest online presence, posting before and after shots of shabby attics turned cozy reading nooks, of kitchens that had given up their dated tile for new maple cabinets. Customers liked my work, liked that I showed up early, finished on time, left their homes cleaner than I'd found them. They started calling me Tyler the Carpenter. That made me laugh. My name had once meant nothing, but suddenly it meant craftsmanship, reliability, artistry, and something else I didn't expect, belonging. Still, I craved more. I craved recognition, not for vanity, not for applause, but for a truth I'd learned about halfway through this journey. Everyone deserves acknowledgement. That a person doesn't have to be blood to belong, and that sometimes the people who matter most are the ones you build yourself. My business, Wilson and Warren Woodworks, became a partnership between the surname I was given and the one I earned, my mother's maiden name and my own. That was intentional. That was identity in action. That summer, I hired a part-time assistant, Miguel, who reminded me of myself at the beginning. Eager, a little lost, hardworking. I showed him how to choose good timber, how to measure twice and cut once, how to talk to clients with respect, and how to treat every job like it was your legacy on the wall. And sometimes, at the end of a long day, we'd sit on the shop's front steps, drinking bottled water and watching dusk settle, and I'd tell him about my mom, and about my dad, and about that letter I found in the garage. I didn't hold back the despair, the hurt, the confusion. He listened, not judging, just holding the space until I finished, until the story was told and the silence afterward felt genuine and soft. I learned something then: truth spoken to someone who listens becomes less heavy. I started journaling, writing letters I'd never send to Dad, to Angela, to Denise, saying everything I could never say at home. I told them how I missed them, how their absence had shaped me, how their rejection had fueled me. I didn't hold back. And in the act of writing, I noticed my voice steadying, my anger cooling into resolve. By the time I turned 22, I had outgrown that tiny room on the other side of town. I found a small commercial garage, rent-old but sturdy, just enough space for 2 workbenches, a saw, a drill press, and my heart's ambitions. I designed a business card, had a local printer make me flyers, and went door to door in neighborhoods where people looked like they needed help refinishing cabinets or repairing trim. Some people ignored me. Others welcomed me. And bit by bit, I built momentum. Every new client was a small victory over the silence. Every payment, a small victory over the erasure. And every piece of wood I shaped under my hands was proof that I existed, really existed, and that I could transform something old into something beautiful, just like I was doing with my own life. And yet, even as business grew, so did the ache. Not because of failure, quite the opposite, but because I realized how much I wanted recognition, and not just to survive. I wanted reconciliation. I wanted for my father to see that the boy he'd discarded had grown into a man of his own making. I wanted for Angela to know the brother she never had was still standing, still hoping. I wanted those family photos on their porch to someday include me. I didn't know how I'd get there. I didn't know if I would. But I knew this was no longer about being taken in or being loved. I knew it was about being seen. And to be seen, you first had to stand up in the light. I wasn't just working to survive anymore, I was working to belong. And for the first time, belonging didn't sound like a house or a name. It sounded like my own voice, steady and true, speaking my life into existence one board at a time. I thought I was ready. I thought I had enough momentum built up inside me that I could stand tall and face them. That the business, the letters unsent, the late-night journaling, and the courage I had stretched in my lungs would be enough to meet whatever came next. So when a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Lewis from Mom's old PTA, got wind of Wilson and Warren Woodworks and offered to host me at a town networking luncheon, I said yes, even though my palms shook at the thought of seeing familiar faces I'd avoided for years, familiar surnames I'd tried to bury. It was early June, and roses were just opening along the drive of the community center. I slipped into my best shirt, the one I wore to client meetings, matching tie, polished shoes reflecting the tiled floor like a promise, and I felt every bit the man I'd become. My heart thudded with determination, but also with a thrumming fear that tomorrow could spill out old wounds faster than a bucket overturned. I wasn't sure I could handle it, yet nothing I'd built up in wood and sweat was enough, unless it could carry me through this moment. Inside the luncheon hall, round tables were set with bouquets and iced tea, and neighbors greeted each other with the familiarity of people who shared barbecues and car rides and church potlucks. I felt like an actor walking on stage without knowing my lines. Then I spotted them, Angela, sipping lemonade, and Dad, in a light blue shirt that fit him well, his hair neat enough that I almost didn't recognize him. And beside him stood Denise. Their posture was perfect, their smiles measured. The kind of smiles that said, "We belong." My chest constricted, so I looked away. I could walk past them, pretend I didn't see them, maybe let this evening be about business. The rational part of me said, "Tyler, don't start a fire you aren't ready to face." But the stubborn part said, "I've come too far to hide now." When Mrs. Lewis introduced me, Tyler Warren, entrepreneur and craftsman, owner of Wilson and Warren Woodworks, I smiled, careful not to tremble, and stood to speak about how every plank of wood, every handmade frame, carried the intention of care, precision, and community spirit. I talked about why I chose Portland, why I loved revitalizing homes that carried family memories, and why I believed a business built honestly, without shortcuts, could reflect values that mattered. I couldn't help but glance at Dad during my speech, hoping to catch something: approval, recognition, anything. But the look I caught was cold calm. He spoke with Denise a few feet away, leaning in, whispering while the light breeze came through the windows and kept the portraits of lilies on the wall swaying. Angela watched me, her lips tight, then looked down. And that was when I realized they were here. They were present, but not present. On stage with me, but never watching. Even when I received polite applause, I felt their absence more starkly than I ever had in the years before. I finished, answered polite questions, mingled, exchanged cards. I shook hands with neighbors: Mr. Patel, Mrs. Nguyen, someone from Portland Habitat for Humanity, and I whispered thank yous, even though each one felt like I was reminding the world I existed. I made my exit before dessert, embarrassed by how tightly my chest felt wound. Outside, the air was cool. I drank deep and looked back through the window at Dad and Denise talking quietly while Angela tucked her hair behind her ear and kept her gaze low. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I'll talk. But next day came and went. No message. No call. I told myself it didn't matter, that their silence was their cross to bear. I dove into work, taking on new cabinet installations and a deck build for a family moving into a newly remodeled classic bungalow. I didn't have real time for regrets. But in the back of my mind, the image of Dad and Angela, two people who should have been the first to cheer, kept pulling me sideways. When my toolbox came back stolen from a job site, I had no one to call except Miguel and one of my clients, Mr. Riddle, who found a replacement kit and offered to help me at cost. That may not sound like much, but it reminded me how important community could be when blood ties failed. A month later, Denise left a message on the phone line where Laughing Bear Ministries recorded voicemails for a fundraiser event. I didn't plan to pick it up, but she left a message asking to meet, to clear the air or finally talk, and though I hated the tone, it felt passive, hesitant, I found myself dialing the number, breathing through my throat raw with emotion. We met at the small park near my shop, the one with the creek that babbled something poetic about resilience. Denise was punctual, hair tied back, crossbody purse in her hand, and eyes that met me with curiosity I hadn't expected. I felt unsteady until I saw Angela behind her, standing there with arms crossed, face hard to read. Dad stayed in the car. I took a seat on the park bench, my legs feeling too long, arms too thin, voice trembling. Denise began, voice soft. "Tyler, thank you for coming. You wanted to talk," I said simply, gripping my phone so tightly its metal edges left indents in my palm. I did, I think. We all messed up. She looked to Angela, who took a half step forward, glancing at me with uncertainty. I swallowed. Messed up? I said, my voice trailing. I didn't know if I was angry. Sad? Both? My chest felt like a wrestling ring after a brawl. Denise nodded. Yes. You lost your home, your name, your family without us ever explaining. She paused. The letter you found. It wasn't supposed to be hidden forever. We thought we were protecting you and ourselves. We were wrong. The gate inside me rattled, threatening collapse, but I held it. Protecting me? By deleting my existence? She looked down. We didn't want to open old wounds. We convinced ourselves that if we just kept moving forward, one day it would fade. I closed my eyes, memory rushing. The slamming of the door that night, the tears I didn't let slip because not letting go meant not breaking. But it didn't fade, I said. I'm here. Angela shifted, voice quiet. I'm sorry. I should have called. I should have at least texted when I saw you at the event, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? I asked, watching the creek absorb my reflection. Afraid you'd hate us. Afraid you wanted nothing to do with us. Afraid of my dad's silence, my mom's grave, everything. I wanted answers, I said. Still want answers. Dennis reached out, hesitant. Ask. There, on that bench, the air around us thick with years of absence and tension, I asked. I asked about the hospital, about why Dad wasn't listed, about who'd told them it was safer to erase me. I asked about Mom's whispers in the night, her sorrow hidden behind broken smiles, and they answered. Intense, halting sentences, at first, then more fluidly. I learned how they panicked when that letter was discovered. How Dad, in shock, lied to protect his reputation, the business, the family. How Denise, pregnant with Angela and hoping for a son, froze under that weight, and how they made decisions based on fear and shame instead of love and transparency. Their admissions were painful. Mine were too. I confessed to nights I'd sobbed alone, nights I'd wondered if Mom had known the truth or if Dad had used her memory to justify hiding me. I told them about the business I'd built, about the nights I'd wanted them to be proud, about the ache that never fully left. They listened, and when I finished, Angela's tears slid down her cheeks, and Denise brushed a lock of hair from her face. Dad eventually got out of the car, walked over, hands stuffed in pockets, and said, softly, "Son." At that moment, every wall I'd built against them cracked. Not crumbled, but cracked. I could still feel pride, fear, hurt, but beneath that was something warmer, fragile. Hope. I didn't forgive them that day. Forgiveness isn't linear. But I understood them. I heard them. And in that understanding, I found a space to breathe that I hadn't known was possible. I drove back to the shop afterward and didn't lock the door. I felt too raw for walls. I thought after that park meeting, something might shift an opening, a crack of light, but instead, what followed was a darkness deeper than I'd ever known. An emotional abyss where every moment felt like I was drowning on dry land. The revelations they offered, raw and halting though they were, didn't instantly heal anything. They simply peeled back another layer of pain I'd spent years reinforcing, and underneath lay a hurt so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. My nights became restless. I woke in the darkness of my rented shop, aches in my shoulders from sleeping on a thin pallet of blankets, blanket shadows pressed hard against me, the hum of the streetlights outside sounding more distant than ever. I found myself replaying every word from that bench. Dad's hesitant, son, Angela's tears, Denise's apology, but instead of relief, it amplified the loneliness I carried. Because even though they'd shown a crack of honesty, their presence felt further away than before. I realized that understanding them didn't mean I understood myself, or that I had a place in their world. I started losing clients. Not because of anything I did, but because I found myself drifting into grayscale, walking through projects with my hands, but my heart somewhere else. One week, I forgot to order lumber for a deck project and had to delay a family's summer barbecue. Another time, I misunderstood measurements and built a shelf that wouldn't fit. I walked into my shop one morning to find my tools strewn in disarray, like someone had searched for something they couldn't name. I almost sobbed at the sight, the mess a mirror of my own inner wreckage. I had always believed action was protectionist, though staying busy would guard me from the emptiness, but nothing prepared me for this. For the first time in years, I felt helpless. I felt small, inconsequential. I felt that maybe building a business, writing unsent letters, having heartfelt talks hadn't changed the fact that I was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. And ghosts don't get to belong, they just drift. My journal entries from that time are full of lines I didn't dare say aloud. They want me, or at least what I represent. Their past mistake, their chance to pretend they care. But do they want me? The real me? The one who hurt? The one who remembers the silence? Do they want to face that with me? I don't belong anywhere. Not at home. Not here. Not there. I stopped going to community events. I sent Miguel a text saying I'd be taking some time off and pored over old photos instead, images of me as a child, chubby cheeks, missing teeth, mom holding me tight, dad grinning proudly. I studied dad's face in those pictures. It wasn't callous, it was love. Why had it died? I looked in the mirror and saw someone unrecognizable. Not the boy chasing baseballs in the backyard, not the teenager who found that hospital letter and was thrown into exile, not the young man who poured himself into business. Someone else, someone defeated. Someone afraid to hope again. One night, I sat on the curb outside the shop after locking up, watching the headlights of cars hum past like they belonged in places that were closed to me. My phone buzzed, a message from Denise. Thinking of you. Call me when you can. I stared at it for an hour. My finger hovered above the reply box. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to go back inside that emotional territory where every sentence felt like I was giving a piece of me away. I pictured conference tables, selfish goodbyes, shallow condolences. I thought, I don't have more to give. And so I didn't reply. I deleted the message and slipped the phone into my pocket. A week later, it wasn't Denise who broke my it was a package. A small, unassuming box with my name in Denise's handwriting. Inside was something I wasn't expecting, a handmade journal. Leather-bound, weathered, the pages blank. A note in Denise's handwriting. You write your pain better than I ever could. When you're ready, share it in a place that helps you breathe again. Not for us, for you. I pressed the edges of the journal to my lips and cried. Grief doesn't follow logic. It doesn't care about timing or reason. It just arrives uninvited, unpacking itself in boxes of ache and memory. In that moment, holding the journal, I realized I had given so much of me away to prove I existed, to force them to see me, to be heard, that I'd forgotten how to care for myself. I'd forgotten that I was allowed to feel, fully and without shame, before I spoke. The next night, 2 a.m. With only the hum of a distant freight train keeping me company, I tore a page out of that leather journal and wrote one sentence that felt like a break in the dam. I am not a ghost. I am not invisible. And I inked the truth. The horror. The silence. The longing that had settled in me like moss on stone. Words poured out until every page in that journal had scribbles filling every inch, the edges soaked with tears, the spine bowed with confessions I'd never spoken. It took days. It took forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep, forgetting to answer calls from clients until I realized I had to call back or lose more than I'd already lost. But each sentence weighed less as it went down. Each confession that touched the page lifted something off my chest. In the final pages, I wrote a letter addressed to myself. Dear Tyler, no matter where you stand, behind a bench, behind a door, behind a wall, you deserve to stand in the light. You are real. You are deserving. You are enough. When I finished, dawn was touching the sky. I held the journal in both hands and felt something shift inside. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if they'd asked for forgiveness, or if I'd given it. I didn't know if business would bounce back, or if loneliness would come again. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel erased. I felt present. Fragile, yes, but present. That night of writing wasn't an end. It was a beginning, a quiet reckoning that survival isn't finishing the marathon, it's putting one foot in front of the other when every muscle screams in protest. It's waking up and saying, I will be here today. And for me, that day started with ink and paper, spilling my soul in darkness, so I could finally breathe in light. I walked into the shop the next morning and brought order back, not because I needed perfection, but because I needed permission to exist here. I organized tools. I cleaned surfaces. I opened the shop door and let the daylight flood in, and listened to the echo of my own footsteps on the concrete floor, and thought, I am here. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't have peace. I didn't have closure, but I had voice. I had presence. And in that voice, in that presence, I found the nearest thing to hope I'd had in years. I thought I had faced the worst of it. I had opened my heart, spilled my pain onto paper, and let cracks form in my defenses until what remained was raw but real. I believed that was the hardest part, that afterwards the path would curve gently upward, toward peace, maybe even a cautious reunion. But life has a way of delivering its most brutal blows just when you think you've survived the storm. And sometimes, those blows come wrapped as revelations that explode everything you thought you knew. I had begun returning to normal, reviving projects, finishing orders, even accepting a small outdoor gig painting reclaimed wood tables for a local cafe. It felt good to work again, to feel confidence return to my muscles and purpose to my mornings. I began working to expand my shop, budgeting for a small expansion to bring in more clients, investing in equipment, talking to local artisans at events. I was feeling quietly proud, cautiously hopeful, and convinced that the worst had passed. Then, one afternoon in late September, a knock came at my shop door, a knock that carried the weight of things hidden. I looked up and there stood a man I'd never seen before, crisp in a dark suit and polished shoes, holding a manila envelope. His name was Mr. Hansen, apparently a private investigator hired on behalf of someone in my family. "What's this about?" I asked, surprised that Dad had done it. He swallowed. "May I come in?" I nodded and let him in. He gave me the envelope, slid it across the workbench. I recognized the official seal from the hospital, from the medical examiner's office. My stomach tightened. "These documents," he began, voice even, "should have been included in the original records. Their absence may have been purposeful. They confirm you are Ronald Warren's son legally, biologically. But there are complications." I looked down. The envelope was thick. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were papers I'd never expected: DNA test results, court documents, even a letter from a fertility specialist named Dr. Shelby Warren. Not just confirming paternity, but revealing donor records, medical disclosures, and an admission that Dad had been donor-conceived himself, using anonymous sperm, and that he'd unknowingly used the same sperm donor for his wife. My mother, meaning Angela, and I could be biological half-siblings, but not in the way I'd imagined. My head spun. The paper blurred. The world tilted on its axis. They weren't hiding because Dad wasn't my father, they were hiding because they believed I was Dad's biological son. But the hospital file lied to hide a bigger truth, that we shared no genetics whatever. That my real father was someone else, someone neither of them had told me about. The more I read, the more it sank in. Dad's reaction 15 years ago wasn't because I wasn't his, it was because they'd believed I was not genetic Warren, and that was too much for their reputation to bear. They thought that hiding the truth meant protecting the family name, but instead they erased me. And now they'd lied about why. I looked at Hansen, eyes full of confusion, rage, grief, and betrayal. "So you're saying I'm related to Angela, sort of. And Dad, he thought I wasn't his, genetically?" Hansen nodded. "They hired me to clarify. They wanted you to know. To be sure. But didn't know how." All I could see was years of erasure, secrecy, and self-preservation pitched on one side. On the other, the open journal in which I'd written my agony. I took a breath so slow I thought it might not come. Then I asked, "Why now?" He handed me a letter, not his, but from Denise, addressed to me, explaining that she'd stumbled on the old donor registry while helping to clear out documents during a prenatal ultrasound before her second child. She realized what it meant. She confronted Dad. He froze. They confronted Mom's records. Then panic. They chose secrecy. But now, with age and regret, they wanted the truth out. Tears blurred my eyes as I read those words, and the weight of every silenced conversation presses down. Betrayed again, but this time not just by desertion, but by deception about my identity to serve their comfort. My mind cracked open. I remembered the first time Dad hugged me tight after my mom died. I thought it was love. Now I wondered if it was guilt that he'd never known who I was. I thought I had been rejected for lack of blood. Instead, I'd been hidden to preserve it. And that realization felt like freezing in fire. But something inside me shifted. Something fierce and honest and angry. I closed that envelope and stood straighter than I had in years. How long was I living a lie? I whispered, voice taut like a drawn bow. Your whole life, Hansen said. They believed the story. They kept it. I looked at my workshop, my life's work in pieces of wood and sweat and healing, and suddenly I knew what I had to do. Not just for me, but for them too, and for every unsent letter in my journal. I asked Hansen to document everything. To package up every result, every note, every test, every letter. I'd need time to think before deciding what comes next, but I wouldn't be silent again. I spent the next night writing a message to Dad, Angela, Denise and Mom, though she'd been gone a lifetime ago. In long sentences, heartful and searing, I told the truth, that I appreciated what they had revealed, but I couldn't stand what they'd hidden. I told them I was willing to meet again, but this time on ground where truth, not shame, was the foundation. I copied the DNA report, the registry notes, the email from Dr. Shelby, and I sealed every piece in a manila envelope and left it by their front door, along with a note. I'm not asking you to love me or forgive me. Just to let go of the lies. Because I'm done living under one. I spent the next days working in the shop, the wood smelling of pine and cedar and fresh starts. I didn't know how they'd respond. I didn't know what would happen. But I knew this. I was done being silent. I was done hiding. I was done building a life no one saw because it rested on half-truths. At night, I held the journal Denise sent me and wrote, I will not disappear again. The twist wouldn't break me. It would bend me into someone more real, someone stronger. Someone who could say, I deserve truth. I deserve recognition. I deserve the right to decide who I am. And in that moment, with the DNA reports heavy in my pocket and the dawn on the horizon, I finally felt ready. The morning I decided to confront them directly, the sky was overcast, gray clouds pressed low, as if mourning the collision of lives about to happen. I walked to their house carrying the sealed envelope of revelations, a tape recorder tucked into my jacket pocket, journalists' notebooks full of questions, and my own heart quaking with fear and conviction. I'd rehearsed the words in my head for days, pacing back and forth across my workshop floor until I could speak through the tremor. I needed this meeting to be finalto, answer every question, bear every silence, break every lie that had wrapped itself around our family for too long. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath before knocking. The door opened slowly, and I looked into faces shaped by years of distance and regret. Dad's lined with guilt, Angela's shimmering with tears before they fell, Denise's expression taut like a drum. They led me inside, and I could feel the house hold its breath, like it, too, was waiting to see if the walls would crack or stand firm. I came here to say everything out loud. I began, voice steady but heavy. I set the envelope on the table, and their eyes switched to it, then to me and back again. I found this. I contacted a private investigator. This confirms the truth Dad told me about my father, but also the bigger truth you tried to bury. Dad swallowed, fists clenched at the arm of his recliner. He opened and closed his mouth like he was searching for safe harbor in gusting seas. Angela and Denise stood behind him. They looked like they were both bracing for a storm. "All my life, I've lived as your son," I said, and I loved that identity. But I also accepted what I thought it cost: medicines, erasure, silence. What I never accepted was being lied to. That you hid the real story because it was messy. Denise took a trembling breath. "It was messy," she said. "And we were afraid, and we never, ever meant to hurt you, though we did. We thought we were protecting you, Dad's business, our reputation. We thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted, and the words trembled with sadness and something fiercer, something beyond pity. "We, because I am real. My life is real. Wilson and Warren is real. My heartbreak is real. You can't clean that up with a conversation." A bead of sweat rolled down Dad's temple. He stared at the floor, then he looked up and shook his head. "Tyler, I'm sorry. I'm sorry in ways I don't have words for." His voice cracked, something broke inside the room. I felt the walls thaw, just slightly. I unsealed the envelope. I pulled out the documents, copies of fertility records, the DNA report, the email chain from Denise's discovery. I laid them out carefully. "These show everything," I said. "They show a lie. They show a cover-up. They show Weem and Angela aren't what we thought we were. They show that your ignorance, your fear, cost us time. Time I can't get back." Angela stepped forward, voice low yet unwavering. "I'm sorry, I thought you still hated me because I didn't text, or because I stood with them. But I didn't understand until now how lost you felt. And I'm sorry for not standing with you sooner." Denise's eyes filled with tears, and she lifted a hand to her mouth. "I didn't want to leave, but every time I thought about telling you, the shame caught me by the throat. I'm sorry." Her apology sounded like a child's confession, fiercely simple and heartbreakingly honest. Dad looked at the pictures behind us, photos on the mantle, memories we all thought we shared. Some had me in them, most didn't. Now none felt the same. He closed his eyes and took a breath. "I loved you, I just didn't know how to hold the truth with that love. I failed." I swallowed hard. I turned and pointed at the table, at every page. "These aren't just papers. They're the reason I lost 15 years. God knows why some of them didn't happen more carefully or compassionately. But now I want something different. I want honesty, even if it's painful. I want boundaries, not silence. I want you to know who I really am, someone you love, not someone whose existence you regret. I want to know who you are to me." Dad's head lowered. Then he looked at me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "But I want it. And I don't know what right I have to ask." I felt everything inside me tremble: anger, longing, grief, love, fear. This moment was fragile, dangerous. I could retreat and close the door forever. Or I could open it wider and risk more pain. "I'll decide that myself," I said softly, "when I can see you act on your words." And then I added, quieter still, "But I want you in my life." Moments passed in silence, pregnant with possibility. Angela brushed at her eyes and offered me a small, hopeful smile. Denise reached to touch my arm. Dad nodded once, his whole body folding against relief and shame. And then I exhaled, a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. I gathered my documents. I looked at them once more, then folded them and slid them into a folder. "This isn't the end," I said. "It's the beginning. Truth isn't a cute, it's a connection." I reached out and touched Dad's hand, his flesh warm, trembling. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes and whispered, "Son." I left our house that day and felt the wind shift. It didn't bring closure that's still being written, but it brought air into rooms that had been sealed for too long. It brought a chance to rebuild on something stronger than silence and shame. On my way home, I turned off the main road and drove through my old neighborhood, the one I left behind at 17. I looked at the house where I'd slept under stars, at the oak tree where Mom's wind chimes used to sing. I thought about the time lost and the work still ahead, But I also thought about the future shaken loose from lies, the chance to shape our relationships from truth, imperfect but honest. That evening, I sat in my workshop and wrote in the journal Denise gave me yet another entry. Today we spoke under the weight of everything we hid. Today we cracked open these years of silence. Today, I stood and said I matter. And maybe that matters more than anything else. I closed the journal slowly, as though each page might crumble if handled too roughly, and I paused. The ache was still there, but now, in its stead, I felt something else. Genuine possibility. Not forgiveness or forgetting, but the quiet promise that we might one day stand in the same room and let truth be our home. The change didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't cinematic. There were no grand speeches or tearful reunions broadcast on living room screens. Instead, the victory came in small moments, quiet acts that finally tipped the scales from mistrust to respect, from hiding to genuine recognition. The very next morning after that confrontation, I woke to a voicemail from Denise. Tyler, Dad, and we both wanted you to know we put the full folder with the documents in a safe deposit box. We've also engaged a family counselor. We're starting with our own sessions, but when you're ready, the office is open. No pressure, just honesty. Her voice was hesitant and tender, and I listened to it over and over, the words reshaping something in my chest like gentle hands repairing a broken vase. I didn't respond immediately. I needed space to process the fact that they were meaning every word. This wasn't a pleading reconciliation, it was an offer. And for someone who spent years erasing me, it felt monumental. I poured myself into my work that day, staining a mahogany bookshelf for a client who'd commissioned it as a gift for her mother. I ran my hand over the grain, feeling beneath my fingers the solidity of purpose, the first real stability in years. When the job was done, I snapped a photo, emailed it to the client, then sent a private message to Dad. Finished the piece today. Wish you could see it. No answer came yet, but I felt no disappointment. Sending the message had been enough. It was a statement. I'm here. I'm doing good things. I'm not hiding. Later that week, I walked into their house. It wasn't a confrontation or an awkward dinner. Instead, it was Dad asking me, tentatively, if I could fix a rattling window frame. He'd put the repairs off waiting, shame apparently jarring his pretty end, then chosen me. I said yes. Angela held the ladder steady. We worked together in companionable silence. When the final screw went in, Dad tapped the frame, looked at me, and nodded. Good work, son. There was no applause, but I couldn't breathe. I could only smile. Victory showed itself again when I received a handwritten letter from Denise, tucked into a box holding my old baby blanket, our school photos, and my mother's favorite cookbook. It read, in her familiar cursive, "Thought you might want to have these back. We kept them safe. We hope they remind you of the good that was before and the hope we still have for what comes after." I cried, but it felt different, like rain falling on healed skin. Not destructive, but nourishing. The box had nothing to do with guilt, it was acknowledgement. Then came the formal acknowledgement at Dad's auto shop grand reopening several months later. He'd spent months renovating it after a small fire, and when the sign went up again, he invited me to join him on stage to say a few words. I walked beside him, introduced him to local reporters, and spoke about family, truth, and the courage it takes to rebuild foundations that were thought destroyed. Dad nodded as I began, and when I finished, he hugged me in front of the crowd, a hug without hesitation, without reservation. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. What nobody spoke aloud was revolutionary. Dad used the official company letterhead to send a letter to the local trade association, referencing his business lineage and including both our names. Wilson and Warren Auto and Woodworks. He built his identity beside mine. That night, I sat in my workshop, thinking about how far we'd come. Our family hadn't forgotten the pain. We hadn't erased the pasture of silence and shame. But for the first time, I felt truly seen and capable of seeing them, flaws and all. So I wrote them one final letter, not the kind that begs or excuses, but the kind that thanks. Thank you for choosing honesty, for letting me build beside you, for believing I deserve a place, even when every reason lay in silence. I'm still finding my way, but it's easier knowing you're walking it with me, not beside me. I didn't know if they'd keep it or burn it, but I knew it marked the real turning point. They were no longer antagonists. They were participants in a story I still owned, a story I would no longer let be defined by erasure and secrets, but by courage and acknowledgement. And as I closed that letter, I understood. Victory isn't a definitive phrase, it's the quiet reassurance that you've been seen, heard, and that who you are matters enough to stand beside, not erase. The calm didn't arrive with fireworks or sudden clarity, it came slowly, like light seeping through the edges of blackout curtains, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Until one morning, I realized I no longer woke up dreading the thought of them, no longer carried their silence like a chain wrapped around my ribs. The shop became more than a refuge, it became a place of harmony, not just survival. Miguel and I expanded the space, added new benches, built a small showroom up front where clients could walk in and run their hands across the grain of our work. And I noticed that people didn't just come for furniture anymore, they came because the room held something: warmth, intention, a sense of being seen. Angela started stopping by on Saturdays, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but a smile and an offer to help sand whatever project was in progress. We didn't talk much at first, but her presence became part of the space, a quiet echo of something we never got to have as teenagers but were building now in small shared efforts: slaughter over crooked drawer slides, the way she stuck out her tongue when trying to center cabinet handles, the soft admission, weeks later, that she wished she'd asked me to stay, back then, when she saw my room empty and Dad's face tight with that old, dangerous silence. Denise invited me to dinner one evening, not a grand affair, just pasta and garlic bread at the kitchen table I hadn't sat at in over 15 years. I stared at the seat I used to fill, remembered how small and scared I'd felt there, and now, as I lowered myself into it again, older, stronger, no longer asking to be accepted but choosing to participate, I felt no resentment, just a quiet awareness of the power that comes with taking your place without asking permission. She showed me photos of the little boy she'd had after me, now 11, curious and bright, who apparently loved woodworking videos and had a small shelf in his room made from one of my early projects, something she'd bought quietly years ago from a community fair, without telling me. Dad wasn't loud in his repair of our bond. He didn't give speeches or press for attention, but I saw it in his effort showing up to my workshop with lunch for me and Miguel, introducing me as my son to new clients at his shop, sitting in the front row at a community event where I gave a short talk about local craftsmanship, arms crossed but eyes soft, that rare smile curling just slightly at the corner. He didn't erase the past, he wore it like a well-used tool belt, worn but not discarded, always part of the job. And I, for my part, found something I hadn't expected in forgiveness, not weakness, not surrender, but liberation. I didn't forget what was done. I didn't ignore the scars. But I no longer let them define me. I wrote my story with sawdust and grain, with laughter shared over jointed beams and clients who cried when they saw their heirlooms restored. I lived with intention. I lived with peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. Sometimes, I still walk by that old house, the one I was thrown out of, the one that held every version of me I once was, the child with wide eyes and calloused knees, the teenager with too many questions and nowhere safe to put them, the young man standing in the rain with a plastic bag and no idea where to go. And I don't do it to reopen wounds or stir old ghosts, but to remind myself that even broken beginnings can lead to something beautiful, something honest, something entirely your own. The porch light still flickers at dusk, and I wonder if the boy I was would recognize the man I've become, not because I have all the answers now, but because I've stopped being afraid to ask the hard questions, to demand truth, to love without begging for it in return. What I've learned is that family isn't just the blood that pulses beneath your skin or the name stitched into a birth certificate. It's the choice to stay, the effort to listen, the courage to return even when your heart feels too bruised to knock again. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it doesn't grant immunity to those who've caused harm, but it frees you. It cuts the rope tied to the heaviest parts of your history and allows you to move forward without dragging the wreckage of other people's choices behind you. I forgave my father not because he asked the right way or at the right time, but because I no longer needed his apology to validate my worth. I forgave Angela because I saw in her a mirror of my own confusion, a girl who had loved me in silence because she didn't know how to love me out loud. And I forgave myself for staying silent too long, for shrinking to fit into a house that didn't know how to hold me, for believing, for so many years, that I had to earn the love I should have been given freely. The truth is, I never stopped being worthy. I was just waiting for someone to notice. Now, when I run my hands along fresh-cut oak or watch a child's face light up as they sit on a bench I built, I feel a quiet kind of triumph, not the kind you shout about or wear like a trophy, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that hums in your chest when the world is quiet and you realize you made it. You endured, you healed. You built a life not out of spite or bitterness, but out of grace and grit, and the deep, stubborn belief that your story mattered even when they told you it didn't. So this is for the ones who were left out, cast aside, rewritten. May you find your voice. May you build your truth. May you never, ever doubt that you belong.